Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode. In today's episode, I am going to be reviewing a video from Dr. Anthony Chaffee, which one of my subscribers has asked me to review. So, in this video, which is Dr. Anthony Chaffee's latest video, so called Why Quitting Carbohydrates Will Transform Your Health. And we're going to watch this and we're going to listen to some stuff from Anthony Chaffee, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, who, of course, is a well known carnivore doctor on YouTube. He says some good things, and he says some things which are actually quite nonsense and not factually correct. So we're going to explore those. I would love for him to have listed his sources for the studies that he is citing. Very difficult to actually fact check anybody when they're not listing their sources, which is always a problem. So I always try and list my sources in my videos. Shame on you, Chafee, for not doing that. But I think I may have found some of the studies that he is referring to, though I have absolutely no idea because I cannot corroborate it, unfortunately. But we'll go through a few of those, and let's get to the video.
Sugar is also very addictive.
Yeah, the sugar monster's real, hey?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sugar is incredibly addictive. There is absolutely no doubt about that. But I don't think it's addictive as they are saying, which I'll come to later on.
Yeah. And so, some people say, well, I mean, sugar, fructose gives a dopamine hit to the reward centers of your brain. And then some people say, well, that doesn't mean it's addictive. I heard one guy say that, well, hugs give you dopamine hit as well. Does that mean hugs are addictive? Well, some people would say yes.
Yes, hugs will give you a dopamine hit. That is absolutely true, but they are nowhere near in the order of things like drugs, methamphetamine, cocaine, etc. And that is a key distinction here. Hugs and other similar activities will give you a little bit of dopamine hit, but barely anything.
They feel much better when they get hugs and they want more of them. Girls with daddy issues, for instance.
Yeah.
Okay. Not quite sure why that's relevant particularly, but okay. That's what he thinks of women. Fair enough.
They might be very addicted to those sorts of things, but um, but the thing is, though, is that hugs aren't going to actually kill those areas of your brain from overstimulation, which is actually what fructose does. So they've done studies with MRIs in humans.
It would be great if he actually showed the studies in either on screen or in the summary and the description of the video, which he hasn't, unfortunately, so we can't fact check those. I have pulled up some of the studies which I think he may be talking about. So studies like this, for example, published, where was it, plus one, dissociable behavioral, physiological, and neural effects of acute glucose and fructose ingestion, a pilot study. Now, if this is the one he is referring to, yes, they did use functional MRI, as I'm highlighting on the screen here. But it was in 12 patients, 12 healthy, lean males. And yes, there was activation in the brain on some of the dopamine centers from fructose, but also glucose as well. And nowhere in the study does it mention anything about brain damage. So I'm not quite sure where he's kind of getting that one from.
Where they've checked just normal people that don't have sugar or drug addictions or anything like that.
Yep, hence the healthy lean males. And it was 12 people, not 12,000, not 12 million. It was 12 people, not exactly a big study. And it was a pilot study. If this is the one that he is referring to, I don't know for sure.
I gave them a dose of amphetamines, like.
Okay. Oh, wait. Are we on fructose now or are we on amphetamines? We've jumped suddenly. So, okay. Maybe this is perhaps the one that we are talking about here. Actually, let's get back to the video.
Some sort of medication, Vyvanse, those sorts of things will give this dopamine.
Vyvanse is an amphetamine used for a prescription for ADHD. Certainly, the brand name here in America, in Australia, sorry, Vyvanse.
Hit and give that big.
Yes, it will give a dopamine hit. That is possibly one of the core pathological problems with people with ADHD, as they have abnormal dopamine signaling in the brain. This is quite well known, hence why stimulant medications can help them.
Reward hit, and you look on MRI, and they can see that that the areas of the brain just light up like a Christmas tree.
Yes, that is quite true. Dopamine will light up front end of the brain. It's been seen on functional MRIs. That's absolutely true.
Then you give that same dose to a meth addict, and it's barely twinkles, right? Because areas of the brain is dead. You know,
Okay. I mean, again, it'd be nice to know what study he's talking about here. Possibly this one in Frontiers, evidence for dopamine abnormalities following acute methamphetamine exposure. Um, Possibly this is the one, that he is referring to. Though again, it's, very, very hard to really know. This is why people should cite their sources so people can actually fact check them.
because they have an overstimulation from just constant turning on of this dopamine. When neurons are on, when they're firing, they actually get damaged.
Yes, this is true. This is why people with epilepsy, for example, prolonged seizures, status epilepticus, is very, very dangerous because you don't allow the neurons to actually recover. So every time a neuron fires, for whatever reason, it's not a very great design, it actually damages itself. And then when it is resting, it can then recover. And for people whose neurons are just constantly firing, such as in status epilepticus, which is where you just have this kind of long term or kind of like long going seizure, which, if untreated, will eventually result in brain damage and death. Basically, yeah, they get progressive brain damage, and if it reaches the point where the brain can't recover, then they have lasting brain damage. This is true.
And they have to turn off to be able to heal and repair themselves. And so dopamine is an excitatory molecule.
Yes, true.
And so as you keep flooding your system with dopamine, it will it will continually excite those neurons. They'll keep turning them on. That's why it drops down the receptors. So you need more to get the same effect. That's why people increase the amount of meth and cocaine that they need to use because they get a tolerance for it. That's what their brain's doing. They're dampening down the receptors.
Yeah, that's quite true. And there's other changes as well that happen. But yes, dopamine will lead to further dopamine. With a lot of people, yes, of course, things like meth and cocaine, these are drugs. But for a lot of people, the drug of choice is something like sugar or maybe alcohol, which technically is a drug. Again, it's a socially acceptable drug. Netflix documentaries. If anyone can hear in the background, my family visiting from England are actually watching downstairs. Netflix, all these things, scrolling on Instagram and YouTube, TikTok, all these things give you dopamine hits. These are not drugs, but the actual drug is really the dopamine. The dopamine addiction is actually very, very real. And that's what drives a lot of this addictive behavior.
And then eventually they just keep flooding this, those cells start to die. And so you see that in those meth addicts, you give them a dose of
Possibly true. Again, it'd be nice to know the study that he's citing here.
amphetamines and it just barely twinkles. But then they give that same dose of amphetamines to sugar addicts who are metabolically sick, same barely twinkle.
Again, it would be nice to see the study so that people can actually read through it, fact check it, and see, critique the study, and so on, rather than just saying it. But okay.
So this killed the same areas of the brain as meth to the same extent as meth.
Okay. This is where you really you really need to be citing your studies here, Chafee, because people need to be able to fact check this stuff because that is a pretty damn serious accusation or I suppose accusation, if you will, statement, if we can, to make that sugar will damage the brain in the same way to the same extent that methamphetamines will. That is a pretty big, bold statement. I would love to actually see the evidence behind that statement. Unfortunately, there are no studies linked, and I haven't been able to find a study that actually shows that myself personally.
So
And is that
drugs aren't going to do that.
fructose?
Fructose specifically.
Specifically.
Yeah. And so
So
it's going to be in all sort of sugar, table sugar, fruit sugar, honey, high fructose corn syrup, processed sugar, unprocessed sugar. It's all the same stuff.
Yeah, no, it's not. Actually, it is entirely different stuff. Fructose, yes, look, technically, if you want to get pedantic, fructose is just fructose. Yes. But fructose in the form of high fructose corn syrup, which is usually where these studies are done, is actually very, very, very different metabolically in the human body to naturally occurring fructose. Naturally occurring fructose also appears in far lower levels, typically, than high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup can be as much as 60-70% in some products, whereas for the most part, fructose in a natural product is going to be like fruit, for example. Fructose is around about 5% of that fruit, not the 60, 65, 70% that it might be in other products. So actually, Chaffee, you're wrong on this one. Fructose is not just simply fructose all over. It is actually quite different. Unless you want to get super pedantic, yes, look, technically the chemical formula is probably exactly the same, but it's very different in how it actually interacts with our bodies. So again, this is where people need to be showing the studies that they're actually using so that people can go and look at it and say, oh, well, actually, it wasn't fruit. It was a concoction of basically highly processed fake sugar that was very different to eating whole fruit.
And so, people say, well, this natural sugar comes from plants. All sugar comes from plants.
Yes, but the processing makes it very, very different. I'm sure Anthony Chaffee, of all people, knows that processed food is entirely different to real food. Just because the ingredients might be the same that are going into the processing does not mean the end product is the same. He, of all people, should know this.
It either comes from corn, beetroots, sugarcane, or fruit, right? So
Yeah.
that's sugar. Sugar is sugar is sugar. It's like saying, well, this
No, it's actually really not, as I've already pointed out, but let's carry on.
is natural arsenic. We have natural cyanide in almonds and cassava, but it's still cyanide and it can still kill you.
Yeah, and the idea that it's fine because it's natural is basically bullshit. It's stupid. I agree 100% on that. But that is very different to equating natural sugar in fruit, for example, in whole food, where it's also typically far lower in its amount, to highly processed, highly refined chemical garbage that is 70-80%, sugar. And God knows what else has been added to it, with often with seed oils, washed in hexane, and God knows what else is happening to these things in terms of the processing. It's a very, very, very different product.
Because it's cyanide, and that's the whole point. In fact, cyanide is supposed to kill you.
Yeah, it's a toxin, and almonds, a bag of almonds, or a kilo of almonds, technically contains enough cyanide to kill a fully grown adult. Nobody's really going to sit there and eat a kilogram of almonds, of course, but if you do, look, you probably actually won't die, but you'll probably get pretty damn sick. A kilo could kill a child, and yes, we do sell it in the health food aisle, which is actually quite disturbing. And I do tell a lot of my patients these things to get the idea of plant toxins through to them. And I'm not disagreeing with Chaffee, Anthony Chaffee here, that toxins are very real and that plant toxins are very real. I tell my patients this day in, day out, till, till I'm blue in the face, and they're probably very sick of me. But we also need to make it very clear, as let's call a spade a spade. Fructose is not the same as high fructose corn syrup and other processed sugars. It's just not.
That's what the plant's trying to do is defend itself. But sugar is not trying to kill you, but it is addictive, and it can be addictive. I mean, just like cocaine, that's natural. That comes from the coca leaf, and heroin that comes from poppy seed, poppy and opiates, right?
Yeah.
So they're all plants, and so the idea that this is natural and therefore good for you is wrong.
Yeah, true. Exactly. Just because it's natural doesn't mean it's good for you. It's natural to be eaten by a bear if you poke it with a stick. Doesn't mean it's good for you. You've still been eaten by the bear because you poked it with a stick. It's natural to be eaten by a killer whale if you go and jump into its mouth. Probably. It's not good just because it's natural. But again, that doesn't mean that all natural things are bad. So again, we're kind of confusing the issue here, and he's trying to like obfuscate and kind of hide this in the kind of the toxin conversation here, I think, which is a little bit disingenuous.
Also, hugs don't actually give you this massive dopamine burst and flood you with dopamine. They actually give a lot of serotonin, which is actually a dampening molecule. Actually slows down the processes and actually preserves and protects your brain as well. So
Yeah, that is quite true.
Uh,
Though too much serotonin can be incredibly dangerous. A condition called serotonin syndrome, which is common. Well, not actually very common. I've seen it a couple of times in my career. I do remember one patient I prescribed a very, very long time ago now, prescribed an antidepressant tablet alongside a triptan for a history of migraines. And thankfully, I knew this was a potential interaction. And I told the patient, very, very clearly, if you start to feel funny, you start to feel weird, any symptoms at all, you call me immediately. And they actually called me about half an hour later after taking it and said they just felt really weird. I sent them to the hospital basically straight away over the phone. This was back in the UK because I said, okay, this is probably serotonin syndrome because they started to feel weird so quickly. And yeah, it was serotonin syndrome. And they pretty much, unfortunately, almost ended up in intensive care, not quite. Thankfully, they made a full recovery very, very quickly, but it was touch and go for a little while actually with this patient. And yeah, they never took the combination again, of course. And ever since, I've been extremely careful to prescribe that combination for patients. And I make sure very, very clearly I tell patients this can be a thing. But anyway, I'm getting way off topic now. So let's get back to the video.
Hugs, while some people may be addicted to these sorts of things or enjoy them,
Yeah, apparently the girls with daddy issues.
they're not addictive in the same way. It's all relative, right?
Has anyone died from a hug? Have you researched
Not
that?
that I know of. No.
Depends who hugs you.
Yeah, probably just depends who hugs you and how hard.
Not from the dopamine exchange, anyway.
Jeffrey Epstein died from hugging.
Eee. We're getting on to Epstein now as well. Okay.
Came
Yeah.
back to get him.
Yeah.
It's crazy though.
Why are they like so low? Are they trying to just kind of show more of the background? The Grin Reapers, I guess this is their podcast and he's guesting on it, but like, why are they so low? It's weird.
When I've definitely got an addictive personality, I reckon, and it kind of runs in my family, definitely, because I've had family members that have had substance abuse and stuff. But I reckon I love definitely.
It's a good question. Can you actually have an addictive personality, or is it the things that you are given? Don't know.
Love coffee, but I stopped sugar.
Yeah, I've actually got off coffee for a week. Certainly do love it, but I've actually gone off it for a week, which is going to be a topic for a video on my main channel. Check out the Meat Medic on YouTube.
Like fully went clean in November and December, or late October to Christmas time. So, and I could not believe how good I felt by cutting sugar out. Like any temptations, I went really clean. And I remember it took the week. I did no alcohol, no sugar. And
so it says no sugar, but what did he actually do? Did he do carnivore diet? Did he do keto? Did he just take out added sugar, all vegetables, all fruits, all sauces, milk, dairy, everything? Full strict carnivore? Or did he just take out added sugar? I mean, we don't actually know, but yes, look, the majority of people going full carnivore straight away will tell you they feel amazing. Absolutely. I mean, I did this. I felt incredible. Absolutely no doubt. But I then started to feel not incredible down the line on carnivore, added some carbohydrates, very small amounts back in, and felt absolutely amazing. Actually, far better than I ever did when I was on the carnivore strictly.
I found the sugar was harder to quit than the alcohol, obviously. But I remember.
Yeah, that is probably quite true, actually. Sugar is quite addictive. There really is no doubt. And I am definitely a carb addict absolutely for sure. I very rarely drink alcohol. Can't even remember the last time I had a drink. Don't smoke, don't do drugs, anything like that. And yeah, sugar can be quite hard to quit, but not certainly impossible.
Having my first piece of chocolate just after Christmas or during that festive break. I remember Whitey saying to me in the lead up, he's like, that sugar monster, why don't you have a little bit? Because I fully stopped craving it and I was in such a good place. And I did have one little taste and then it got me off the rails again. Hey.
Yeah. Why would you have a taste though? If you felt amazing off the sugar and you're not addicted to it anymore, and you don't want it anymore, why would you even have a taste? Why bother?
Yeah. Like it was crazy how like every day then after that I was like, oh, I'll have a little bit of a fun size chocolate or something. But then it creeps back in.
Yeah, okay, but this is chocolate. Chocolate is very addictive. It's designed to be addictive. It's not fruit. It's not honey. It's not dairy. Well, it kind of has all those things in. Yeah, maybe not honey. If this is honey nut, whatever. But I mean, that chocolate, that's not a thing, but like caramel and all that kind of stuff. But it's designed to be addictive. It's a commercial product. It's a highly processed commercial product. It's designed to be addictive. This is not natural sugar that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Could you
I
just
was always ashamed of myself.
could you rank these in
Yeah, look, I've been there many, many times. Definitely ashamed of myself previously in my diet, but I've come to a place of acceptance now with my diet, which is honestly amazing.
worse for my body out of a plum,
Mm-hmm.
an avocado,
Mm-hmm.
a white potato, and coconut water? Because these are my little vices.
I mean, individually, none of those things are going to do anything remotely dangerous to you, apart from maybe the potato if you don't cook it. What was it? Coconut water, plum, potato, and I've completely forgotten the other one. None of those are going to do anything to you. Maybe the potato, that's going to be the number one danger in terms of oxalates, lectins, phytates, these kind of thing, mostly in the skin and the black bits and the green bits, cut those out the eye of the potatoes, really marginal. Then in terms of oxalates from a single potato, it's the bulk, it's the size, it's the amount of potatoes that we eat that actually causes the majority of the problem, not really just a single potato. The plum really isn't going to do much. Again, one plum, show me any evidence, any study. I challenge anyone out there to show me a single study that showed somebody got harm from eating a single plum. Unless you're allergic to plums, no, it didn't happen.
White potato first and foremost.
Wipe that out.
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
when I finished the run, I was super depleted, felt I was about to pass out.
Mhm.
And at the ultra station, they have this little array of treats. There's like water, little jelly snakes. They had carrot cakes, cookies. You should have seen me. I was like, because I felt so low and like I was about to pass out. I was eating oatmeal cookies, grabbed a Lamington. I went past the caramel slice. I thought it did good there. But I grabbed a bag of little white potatoes. And as I'm eating them, they actually felt good.
Hey guys.
But yeah, so white potatoes are the worst out of them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's going to give you a bigger glucose spike, and you're going to give a bigger insulin hit as well.
So what? A glucose spike, a glucose raise, an insulin spike is not a problem. There is so much fear mongering about insulin from carnivore influencers like Dr. Anthony Chaffee, people like Ken Berry, Sean Baker, and so on. You do not need to fear insulin. You do not need to fear insulin. I feel like I need to say this. There is so much fear mongering out there about insulin. This is not a problem. If your blood glucose goes up and down, if your insulin goes up and down, this is not a problem. The problem comes when you've got a sustained raise, a sustained rise in your blood glucose, not when you have an immediate up and down. That is not a problem. That is a basic physiological function that we are designed to handle.
It depends on the plum. I mean, plums can be very sweet. They do have fiber in them, which actually mitigates the absorption. People don't realize this, but fiber is an anti-nutrient. It actually blocks out the absorption of many nutrients. It actually stops you from absorbing things.
Yes, that is quite true. But I would like Dr. Anthony Chaffee to actually talk about at any point, and I've never heard him talk about it, the difference between soluble and insoluble fiber. They are very, very different things. And generally speaking, when you look at the research, and look, if people want me to do a video on insoluble versus soluble fiber on my main channel at the Meat Medic, let me know in the comments, over there on this channel. I will happily do a video on that. When you look at the research, generally, soluble fiber comes out generally actually improving health. It's really quite interesting, actually. Generally improves gut health, generally improves things like constipation, diarrhea, reduces bloating, farting, gas, all that kind of stuff. Also can reduce sex hormone binding globulin, really interestingly, and helps people to generally go to the toilet, makes it easier to do a number two. Insoluble fiber, sorry, rather, actually causes a lot of problems. So, soluble fiber on the whole is good for health on the whole, as far as the evidence is concerned. Insoluble fiber, actually, a very, very different story. And it generally causes a lot of bloating, a lot of gas, a lot of farting, a lot of tummy upset, problems with constipation because it just gives you more bulk. It doesn't actually help you to kind of get it out like soluble fiber actually does. And this is actually a big problem. So there's actually a big distinction here, really, between soluble and insoluble fiber. Now, I can't give you really specific examples as to what acts actually in what, because it's going to be completely different in everything. But very, very, very broadly speaking, vegetables and things like nuts and seeds, like the coating, the outside, the skins, the husks on nuts and seeds, the bran, all of that kind of stuff, that tends to be the insoluble fiber. And it's really effectively designed as a protection mechanism for that plant, for that seed, for that nut, because it's really hard to actually get into. It's really hard to break down and digest. Soluble fiber, on the other hand, tends to be more in fruit, and it's more like the inside of the fruit. So, like an apple, for example, the outside, the skin is going to be mainly insoluble fiber, and the kind of inside, obviously, the seeds, we don't eat those anyway, but the kind of the core, it's really tough and fibrous. That's much more the insoluble fiber. The rest of it is going to be the soluble fiber. Again, the same thing with something like a pear or an orange. The skin is really that tough, thick, insoluble fiber and all the pith and everything like that. Whereas the actual main part of the fruit is actually the soluble fiber. And these have very, very, very different effects on health that, again, nobody really in the carnivore space really wants to talk about. They just want to lump it all together and say, oh, fiber is really bad for you.
And people say, oh, that's a good thing. You'll absorb less of the stuff that you eat. Oh, that's great because we don't want to absorb all these things we eat. Why do you eat it?
Yeah, that's a bit of a retarded statement to make. If you're eating it, why are you eating it if you don't want to absorb anything? And this is where people would say, well, yes, but you absorb less toxins and so on. Well, yes, that's true, but maybe just don't eat the toxins in the first place. Eat much less toxic food. And if you want to delay the absorption of glucose, just, or fructose, just eat less of it. Just don't gorge on it and then expect fiber to help you out. It's just stupid, really, in my opinion.
Right? We eat things in order to gain nutrients and so we can absorb them. And so, yeah, if you're eating high octane garbage, then yeah, sure, reducing the amount that you absorb is probably a good idea, but you're still absorbing some.
Yeah, and you're not necessarily going to absorb necessarily that much less. You're just going to delay the absorption as well.
And probably just a better idea just not to eat it at all. But plum does have some fiber. They can be very, very sweet, so they can have a lot of sugar.
These are sweet.
Sweet plums.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. More jokes.
Yeah. So I mean that's not great. It also
I think he may have missed the joke there. Straight over his head.
depends on how much you're eating of
Okay.
them. If you're having a plum every now
Just
and then.
one every week, maybe.
Yeah. As opposed to potatoes every day, that's going to be different. If you're eating just bags of plums, then yeah, plums.
Who eats bags of plums every day? This is another issue I see with this kind of, people like Chafee. They take everything to the extreme. And they use extreme examples to make people think that like sugar is going to kill them. And look, I'm not a fan of carbohydrates that particularly. I teach low carbohydrate ketogenic carnivore diet. I do teach animal based diets to some people, Paul Saladino's diet, but it's kind of, not his particular diet where it's like 300-400 grams of carbs a day. No, the actual animal based, which is more like 100, which is a low carbohydrate diet on the whole for most people. But it's just a real bugbear of mine when I see people, influencers, talking about these things, and they just use these stupid extreme examples to try and make their point. Which the reality is nobody's going to ever eat that amount, really. And if they did, they'd probably do it for a day. They get really sick and then just not ever eat plums ever again. And so it's just not. It's just a stupid example.
Are going to be worse. Um, Also remember that fruit, if it's ripened on the tree or the vine, is going to have a lower toxic load. So fruit still has toxins.
True, but far less on the whole compared to things like vegetables, nuts, and seeds and grains. Certainly of the ones that really make a really, really big difference. So things like oxalates, lectins, and phytates, they are much, much lower in fruit compared to other things like nuts, seeds, and grains and vegetables, for example.
It's just that the sweet fruits, the ones with fructose, it's sort of a double-edged sword, fructose, because we recognize that as sweet, that sweetness as something safe. And so it's called an
Yeah, that's true.
evolutionary trap. So we
Not quite, but I'll get back to that.
recognize that as safe. So our hindbrain is saying like, "Ooh, that's safe. We can eat that." Right? That's not going to kill us. Right now, we can get energy from that. It won't kill us. It's a plant that's safe to eat because we don't know of plants that contain fructose that are acutely poisonous to us that will kill us that day
Don't know. Cassava melon? Pretty sure that could probably kill you.
if we eat it. That doesn't mean they don't have toxins. Grapes and avocados
Starfruit? That's, I'm sure, got fructose in, extremely high oxalate. If you eat enough of those, they will kill you for sure.
will both kill cats and dogs, right? They don't
Okay, but we're not cats or dogs. So why are we talking about cats and dogs?
kill us, but how do they kill a cat and dog? Because there are toxins in them.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
But that's cats and dogs. That's not humans.
But it's just that they're less toxic to us, right? So we have more of a defense towards that.
Again, I'd like to see any study showing that avocados are going to kill anybody of any great amount. I mean, how many avocados? Let's just take oxalates, for example, which is probably the number one toxin in avocados. A whole avocado has something like 25, maybe 30 milligrams of oxalates, depending on which source you look at. A toxic fatal dose of oxalates is probably somewhere between 3 and 6 grams, depending on who you talk to. So there was a patient, 10 years ago now, maybe, a case, death by sorrel soup. If you Google that, you'll find it. A Frenchman, I think it was, who had other health problems, died after consumption of sorrel soup at a restaurant. And it was estimated at the time he ate about 6 grams of oxalates, although reading Sally Norton's book and speaking to her on the podcast previously at the Meat Medic podcast, my other show, she was confirming that she thinks it's more like about 3 grams of oxalates. So an avocado has about 25 to 30. Let's just make it easy and say 30 milligrams for the maths. So we need 3 grams, which is 3,000 milligrams. And avocados are 30. So we need to eat 100 avocados to potentially get to a toxic dose of oxalates. Now, there could be other toxins in avocados. Of course, there is going to be. There's probably hundreds of toxins. But what toxins actually make a difference here? And again, Dr. Chaffee is not citing any sources for any of this stuff. He is basically just saying, oh, well, avocados can kill cats and dogs, therefore it's toxic to humans. Well, we're not cats and dogs. Can we stick to maybe human studies, perhaps?
Towards them. But like wine has tannins, right? They go, oh, it's like red wine has a lot of tannins and all that sort of stuff. And where does that come from? It comes from the grape, right? So they have these tannins which will bind to proteins, denature them. They're not as useful. We can't absorb them and get as much nutrients out of them. And they do other sorts of things in your body. There's a wide variety of different tannins. They can do a lot of different things, but they're toxins, right?
Yeah.
And so they're just not going to kill you that day.
Is there really any evidence that tannins are going to cause any real major harm to anybody in any significant amount that they're going to drink? I mean, yes, the alcohol, of course, but the tannins, I mean, tannins consumption have actually been well associated with improvements in cardiovascular health, for example. Now, I'm not advocating for eating plants, particularly. I do eat a little bit of vegetables here and there, but very, very, very little. If I have a couple of spoons of peas once a week, that's pretty much about all I might eat. I do eat fruit here and there and dairy, and I basically ketogenic diet. I'm not a carb addict. Well, I probably am, but I don't eat tons of carbs like Paul Saladino, for example. I just really have issue with people, as I've said, I won't labor the point too much, but saying these things and not presenting any kind of studies to really back them up.
But so we recognize, okay, that's something safe. So we recognize that as sweet. And okay. But we would never come across that amount of sugar in the wild. There would be a very small amount. Generally, fruit were very tart. They didn't have much.
I don't know. I mean, seasonally in the summer, fruit would have been probably pretty damn plentiful, most likely. And yes, it was less sweet. It was maybe more tart. But again, really, where's the evidence to kind of back this up? It wasn't that much less sweet.
Meat to them. They're mostly fiber and seed. And so
Hmm, there's still a fair bit of sugar. I mean, on the whole, now fruit is about 10% sugar, which isn't that much. In days gone by, it may would have been 5 or 4 perhaps percent. But also, we most likely would have just gorged on it in the winter months. And yes, it probably would have made us fat. That would have been what we were trying to do, most likely to kind of get fatten up essentially for the winter. But that doesn't mean that, we don't need carbohydrates just because it may have made us metabolically unhealthy for those few months. Maybe what we just don't want to do is eat that level all year round. Maybe we just eat not quite as much of the fruit, but maybe we are actually designed to eat some at some point, which is again not really evidence on, the carnivore diet. No one's eating fruit, and then I think they can have issues.
Just cultivated these and bred these things over the century and the millennia to make them sweet as hell, much bigger than they were before, with a much higher fructose content. And then, you had to fight a swarm of bees. Like, you die, doing that before they figured out how to smoke them out. You
Well, I mean, there are like stingless bees, for example, that I'm not sure they would like, I don't know, maybe they eat you. I don't know. I'm not sure how many people would die from it. But I mean, there's actually evidence going back a long time, actually, almost 10,000 years. There's evidence suggesting that, humans have been eating honey for a very, very long time. Possibly there is suggestion even back to Neanderthal days, which is really, before Homo sapiens. Around 2.5 million years ago, there is suggestion that they were fashioning tools to actually extract honey from hives. So, hmm, yeah, and you can just Google that if you want the sources for that. I know I'm not quoting my sources necessarily, but you can Google that as well, and you'll find it.
could not get access to the honey.
Think there's an article in the Smithsonian I came across earlier when I was watching this video earlier.
And if you did, you figure that out. People didn't come across a honey, honeybees all that often necessarily.
What's interesting, because I mean, that obviously directly kind of contradicts what people like Paul Saladino say in his work with the Hadza out in Africa, where they basically just found honey straight away. They went straight to it every day. They just gorged on honey. I mean, they're still following their indigenous practices. How long have they been doing it for?
And you certainly wouldn't be finding refined sugars.
No, that is true. But again, processed refined sugars are very, very, very different to naturally occurring sugar in the quantities it occurs in naturally as well.
And sugary drinks and dumping sugar in absolutely everything.
Yes, nobody was like, going out and farming Coke millions of years ago. I think we know that much.
So it's called an evolutionary trap. So there's something in our brain that says, "Ooh, that's safe," and we get the go signal. And especially when you combine that with sugar, with fat and salt, you get a big go signal. And
Yeah, and that's what manufacturers refer to as the bliss point. People like Marty Kendall that I've spoken to on my main show at the Meat Medic podcast. We've spoken about this on the show there. The bliss point made by manufacturers, that ideal, optimal kind of addictive potential, the perfect combination of sugar, protein, fat, not really protein, but a little bit of protein, sugar, protein, fat, and salt and other micronutrients as well to get that perfect addictive potential.
so that's why everything's just sugary fats with salt in it, right? And so you get this big go signal, and you don't know how to stop, and you eat, you eat, you eat, you eat, right? And so that's the thing. So they had these things with hummingbirds. Another example of this.
Okay, so it's not really an evolutionary trap. So an evolutionary trap kind of refers to this idea that there was something in our evolutionary past that is no longer advantageous to us, or is in fact really more so actually directly harmful to us. So what he's kind of really referring to there, what he's suggesting is this evolutionary trap of fructose being kind of signaling the body that it's okay, it's safe, it's not going to kill you, but then becoming very, very addictive. So we eat too much of it. And for some reason, and again, he's doing a very, very poor job at explaining this. He's just throwing words out and not really explaining what they mean or anything. He's now saying, well, we must have evolved away because for it to be a trap, it means we no longer want that thing. We must have evolved away from, fructose being potentially useful to us. Otherwise, it's not really a trap. It's just sugar addiction, but it's not an evolutionary trap.
Hummingbirds, they're looking for little flowers to get nectar from, and they have these little connectors on these electric fences out in farms in the Midwest in America. And they had these little red plastic connectors. And it was just the right shape and the right color that it looked like the flower this little hummingbird normally went for. And it just went in, stuck its face in there, and then just hit the electric fence, dropped dead. And so just like thousands of these things were just dropping dead because they were thinking these things were flowers. So that's an evolutionary trap. Their brain is telling them, that's where my food is, that's where I got to go. And they're dying.
Well, yeah, no, again, that's not really an evolutionary trap. That's just the bird, that's just tricking the bird into thinking that there's food, and then it's just dying because it's not food. It's actually a trap. That's not an evolutionary trap. That's just a trap.
And then they had, they changed the color of it. Even though it was the same shape, it was a different color, solved the problem. So this is our
Yeah, because they don't recognize it as potential food anymore. Again, not an evolutionary trap.
evolutionary trap. And so because we have such access to the sugar, which we would never have in the wild,
Yes, that is true. Very, very true.
we just don't understand that this go signal is really bad. You can have a go signal from meat, high fat meat. It tastes good. Bacon is amazing. Like I know Jewish people who ate bacon because it's like, yeah, pig's, dirty creature. You're not supposed to eat it, but bacon's good.
Not terribly PC, is he?
Yeah, and like I've had friends of mine say that who were Jewish, and it is good. It's delicious. It's salty fat. It's amazing, right? So you're getting those go signals.
Again, a lot of bacon is highly processed to taste even better. But yes, look, bacon does taste nice.
But that eventually doesn't taste good anymore. You get sort of negative feedback. So the more bacon you have, the more meat you have.
Has this guy ever eaten bacon? I'm not sure that happens with bacon. Maybe other meat, yeah, but bacon just more.
The less good it tastes until finally it doesn't taste good anymore. And you self-limit, you self-regulate the amount that you're bringing in. Whereas things like sugar, that regulation goes off. You're just getting this go signal the whole time. And it doesn't really dampen. Hey, everyone. Also, fructose, sugar in general will raise blood sugar. That raises insulin. That does a lot of horrible things in your body.
No, it doesn't. Insulin does not do a lot of horrible things in your body. Insulin is extremely useful in the body. It does a lot of good stuff in the body. Just go and read Ben Bickman's book, Why We Get Sick, and it talks all the amazing things that insulin does. I'm sure there's probably thousands of things we don't even know about. When insulin becomes dysregulated and insulin resistance starts to build up, whatever that exact pathological process is, because nobody still really quite understands it or knows about it that much. It's all kind of conjecture and so on, really, at the moment. They're based on reasonable kind of theory and so forth. But insulin itself is not the problem here.
They're very important because people think it's like, well, your blood sugar goes up and then insulin goes up and that just drives energy into cells. That's a normal reaction. That's a normal process. It's a normal process down here at normal physiological levels. But when you start spiking up your blood sugar and spiking up your insulin, that is completely out of balance because of it.
No, it's not. Depending on the level, of course. If you're going crazy high, like, yeah, that's obviously a problem. But no, it's pretty normal for blood sugar to just go up and then come down again. That is pretty normal. That is a normal physiological response.
It was just about insulin driving energy into cells, that would be one thing. But it's not. Insulin affects over 100 different metabolic processes in your body.
Yes, that's quite true. But again, they only really become affected when insulin is dysregulated, not if you eat an apple, for example.
And so if your insulin's around a 5, which is a nice place for insulin to be, then it's affecting everything at a 5.
Fasting insulin, yes.
Right? But then you eat some pasta or you have that super sweet plum or bag of white potatoes and it jumps up to 35.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then it will pretty much come back down relatively quickly. Okay, pasta and potatoes. Look, I'm not advocating for them. They're garbage food, really, in my opinion. But a plum, yeah, like no problem with a plum. Plums are delicious. It's going to come back down again pretty damn quickly. And now insulin going up isn't necessarily going to interfere with any other metabolic processes within the body. But again, Chaffee, I'm sure, knows this, but he's basically just kind of talking nonsense now and glossing over it to make it sound more dangerous that your insulin's going up.
But you're affecting everything at 35. I had a patient that came in to my office a few months ago His fasting insulin, so without eating for 24 hours, was 72, right?
which is pretty damn high. Pretty damn high. No doubt this patient is a diabetic.
Be at a 5. It was 72, right? And that's fasting, right? So if he ate something, then that was going to jump up even higher than that. So he was
Probably. But I mean, really, what Chafee is referring to here is this patient, no doubt, has a large amount of insulin resistance, which, yes, is a kind of a human construct. It's a made up concept, but as a concept, it is pretty sound. And basically, that really refers to insulin just working in a dysfunctional way. It becomes very dysregulated and dysfunctional. And that is where you're going to have other problems in the body as far as insulin is concerned. Not just if your insulin goes up and then comes back down again, if you eat a plum, for example. It's when you have this dysregulation. And if your fasting insulin is 72, yes, look, that is sky high. It really should be below 10, optimally, probably around 5 or 6, as Dr. Chaffee is rightly pointing out.
obviously going to have a lot of metabolic issues with that because, again, this affects over 100 different things.
Was he diabetic or something?
Yes, he was very much diabetic and had other metabolic issues. But I put him on a carnivore diet. 2 months later, actually 6 weeks later, his fasting insulin was down to 35.
Which is still ridiculously high for a fasting insulin. That is still extremely metabolically unhealthy. 6 weeks on a carnivore diet, I mean, probably should have improved much beyond that, but I don't know this patient. Maybe they weren't exercising. Maybe they had very low muscle mass, sarcopenic obesity, grossly overweight. Who knows? But not a fantastic improvement. Yes, it's a good improvement, but not fantastic. It's still very, very high.
72. It means it makes a massive, massive difference in
That's not a huge difference, actually. If you're at 35, you're still extremely metabolically unhealthy.
immediately. Nothing else does that. No endocrinologist
Yeah, medications could actually do that.
on this planet doing the traditional medicine up until right now, when people are actually starting to cop onto this, has ever reversed anyone with diabetes ever.
That's bullshit. People have been reversing type 2 diabetes, which I presume he is referring to, actually quite a long time. I mean, there's people that have been doing low carbohydrate diets, ketogenic diets, reversing type 2 diabetes for a very, very long time. And I actually just want to show you this study now. I haven't pulled up the actual study here because really all I could find is on Nutrition Fact, which is basically a pro-vegan bullshit website. But so Walter Kempner's rice diet. Now, Walter Kempner was a German physician, a refugee from the Nazis. The study, ethically, was extremely questionable. But the science is fascinating. And look, we should never repeat this study in the way that it was done, but extremely exciting in terms of the science, absolutely fascinating. And basically, as you can see here, the diet was essentially consisting of white rice, sugar, fruit juices, vitamins, and iron, and around 2,000 calories, extremely low protein, and high amounts of fruit juices per day. And this guy got unbelievable results. Unbelievable results. Absolutely incredible. But it was an insane study protocol. Very ethically challenged, very ethically, very, very bad ethically, but supposedly. But the study was incredible. So people have been doing this for a very long time, and they've been curing things like diabetes with just eating sugar, which kind of flies entirely in the face of what Dr. Chaffee is saying here. He should be aware of this. I mean, Dr. Chaffee is on internet forums that I'm on. I've pointed this out to people before, including him. He should be aware of this. This is pretty common knowledge in the kind of, medical sphere about Walter Kempner and the rice diet. So actually, this is an entirely bullshit statement. And despite that, people have been curing type 2 diabetes for a while now with low carb and ketogenic diet, not just right now, suddenly on the carnivore diet, now we're suddenly able to cure type 2 diabetes. No, we've been curing it for some time, just not with medications. That's very true. You cannot cure type 2 diabetes with medications.
Right. And certainly not with the traditional methods of medication, because that just treats the symptoms. It doesn't treat the underlying disease.
Yeah.
No, that is not true either. Medications do help to treat the underlying disease. They don't just treat the symptoms. Again, this is a baseless, kind of factless statement here, really, from Dr. Chaffee. And again, he should know better. And being a kind of I suppose, self-proclaimed metabolic expert, he should know better. Medications do, in fact, help to treat the underlying problems with type 2 diabetes. It's just they will never cure type 2 diabetes by themselves. Well, I mean, by definition, it's impossible to cure if you're still taking the medications. They can certainly help. There is absolutely no doubt. And they do far more than simply treating the symptoms.
And so this is treating the underlying disease. You're getting rid of the carbohydrates, and the insulin just comes right down. The reason the insulin
Well, that's interesting because, again, I've just pointed out Walter Kempner and the rice diet when just feeding them literally pretty much just a pure carbohydrate diet. And yet their diabetes got better. These people lost profound amounts of weight and got extremely metabolically healthy. And better yet, they actually supposedly kept it off when they went off the diet, which is absolutely fascinating and throws the whole low carb keto thing into almost not disrepute, of course, but it makes me question, actually, is there just, is there more than one way to skin a cat? And then you look at populations like Papua New Guinea, I think it is, and they have an incredibly high carbohydrate diet, typically their cultural diet, yet almost no rates of type 2 diabetes at all. Then you go and introduce things like McDonald's into the mix. Now, I'm not bagging on McDonald's here. Yeah, it's fine every once in a while. But unfortunately, again, it's designed to be addictive. McDonald's, please do not sue me. It's designed to be basically addictive to sell money, to sell product and make money for the company. Just like any business, they of course have a responsibility to their shareholders. But there's better ways, I think, of doing it personally. Then you introduce processed food like McDonald's, for example, and specifically seed oils, and then suddenly the rates of type 2 diabetes skyrocket. So you put those two things together, Walter Kempner and the rice diet, eating stacks of carbohydrates and curing things like type 2 diabetes and metabolic dysfunction. And then people like Papua New Guinea eating a high carbohydrate diet, not getting these problems, and then adding in seed oils and then getting type 2 diabetes, you start to wonder what is actually the driving force behind type 2 diabetes. Is it actually carbohydrates? Is it actually seed oils? Now, I mentioned kind of covered this in one of my other videos. Judy Cho was talking a little bit about this, and I'm a little bit critical of Judy Cho in that video, but she does raise a good point. Is it the seed oils that's actually causing the problem, or is it the carbohydrates? Or perhaps is it the combination of those two things? Now, there is an old adage in medical school that I'm sure Dr. Chaffee heard as well. Nobody ever became diabetic from eating fruit without deep frying it first. To be honest, I used to think that. And then I thought that was BS when I started doing low carb work. And now I almost kind of think that again, to be perfectly honest. I've seen my metabolic health really maintain amazingly since I added some fruit back into my diet. People like Paul Saladino, yes, he's got other problems, but his kind of metabolic health, actually, things like insulin, glucose, HbA1c, and so on the whole, look amazing. It's just he's got other issues with sex hormone binding globulin and DHEAs, which he needs to address as well. But anyway, let's get back to the video.
goes up like that is because high blood sugar is toxic to the body. This is what kills diabetics. No one's arguing that. I've never heard anyone argue that. So the people that say,
well, they also die from hypos, which is low blood sugar. That certainly will kill people as well, for sure. They go into coma and then death and get brain damage and death. But yes, hyperglycemia is also very toxic. Absolutely.
well, your blood sugar goes up and insulin goes up correspondingly. That just drives energy in. I was taught that that exact phrase was taught to me in biochemistry 24 years ago.
That's because it's true. When your blood sugar goes up, a normal physiological response, insulin will rise as well, which will bring the blood sugar down to a safe level. This is exactly true.
Yep.
Right. But it ignores all the other functions that insulin has in the body.
No, it doesn't. As I've already said, they will not be affected if you eat some sugar. If you're highly insulin resistant, then yes, you have disordered insulin regulation, and then the effects on the rest of the body will be a problem, but not if you just eat sugar, just as a one off. No, that's not going to have those effects.
It ignores the fact that our primary metabolic state is one without carbohydrates.
Ooh, is it? I wonder where he's getting that from. Again, I would like to see some evidence to support that statement because that is a pretty damn big statement to make that our primary metabolic function, our primary metabolic state, sorry, is basically ketosis. That is very interesting. And I've heard him, he doesn't mention it in this video, but I've heard him mentioning things like babies before. And the babies are predominantly in ketosis. Okay, that is probably true. But why does human breast milk have a quite large amount of sugar in it then? Hmm. Why are we feeding our babies naturally, why is the human body producing breast milk that is supposedly so toxic to human babies? It's going to kill them. It's going to disorder all their insulin. All of these 100 plus metabolic functions are going to be completely disordered in our babies. Why then are we feeding them glucose? Why are we feeding them? Well, it's not actually glucose, it's galactose. But why are we feeding them sugar in human breast milk if it's so bad for them? And then it's breaking them out of ketosis. So they're not in ketosis all the time. Clearly, they are not designed to be in ketosis all the time. So that doesn't really make sense then, does it, Dr. Chaffee? The other thing I've heard Dr. Chaffee talk a lot about is the Inuit population, which again, he doesn't talk about in this video. Now, I don't know if he is aware of it. I mean, he should be because Paul Saladino kind of schooled him about it in the debate they had a long time ago now. And you can find the video on YouTube, I'm sure, Dr. Paul Saladino debating with Dr. Chaffee. Now, I can't remember exactly where it was in that video, but I distinctly remember Dr. Chaffee not being aware that the Inuit population, so the indigenous kind of North Canadian people, Eskimos, if we use the old name for them, um, they predominantly lack or have a mutation in something called the CPT1 gene. I'm going to bring it up on the screen now so you can find this study, the paradox of the carnitine palmito transfer, palmitol transferase, I'm not going to bother saying that again, type 1A P479L variant in Canadian Aboriginal populations, otherwise known as the Inuit. Now, basically, you guys can read this study, of course, if you want to. I'll leave it up on the screen. Basically, the long and short of this is the Inuit population are pretty much some of the only people, if not the only people in the world who historically, culturally, have basically no access to carbohydrates. However, they're also pretty much the only people, as far as I'm aware, on the planet. I'm sure now it's different with cultural spreading and into breeding between different cultures and so on, all this thing, genetic diversity and so on. But historically, they were the only people, as far as I'm aware, that also had this variant, this mutation of the CPT1 gene. Now, if you don't know what the CPT1 gene is, it's actually an incredibly important gene, or protein rather, in the Randall cycle. Now, the Randall cycle, the carnivores love to go on about the Randall cycle, saying that, if you eat carbs with fat, you'll block, quote unquote, you'll block the Randall cycle. Well, you can't block the Randall cycle. It's not a physical thing that you can just block. But the idea is basically the Randall cycle boils down to you can either burn carbs or fat as a fuel source at any one time. If you're eating too much of one, then you won't be able to burn the other. That's the overly simplistic version of the Randall cycle. But these Inuits lack, or the majority have this mutation, in this CPT1 gene. And the effect is that they basically stops them going predominantly into ketosis. So studies actually show the majority of Inuit population is not in ketosis, which I don't know if Dr. Chaffee was aware of. He said he wasn't aware of it actually before that video with Dr. Paul Saladino. And for someone who talks a lot about the Inuit population and how ketosis is really good for us, and these are a shining example of how long-term ketosis is perfectly fine, he really probably should have done his homework on that one, because actually the majority of them are not in long-term ketosis, which really actually raises the question, is it actually a natural human state or not? Now, I'm a fan of keto, don't get me wrong, but is it the natural human state? And also, the, I suppose, flip side of the Inuit study is why? Why do they have this mutation? And they're the only people on the planet, as far as I'm aware, that has this mutation. But they're also the only people on the planet that can't effectively get them out of themselves out of ketosis if they went into ketosis, because they just don't have access to those carbohydrates. Well, that's an interesting thought. Perhaps it could be that long-term ketosis is actually harmful to human beings. And so it's actually better to just not really go into ketosis at all. Or maybe not deep ketosis, perhaps. Let's get back to the video.
And that almost every animal on Earth does, except honeybees and hummingbirds, rely on fat and protein, not carbohydrates. Carnivores, because they eat animals that are made out of fat and protein, not carbohydrates. So they're all in that ketogenic state.
Yes, probably true, but also they will also consume muscle glycogen. The liver will also have glycogen. The brain will probably have some glucose as well. We probably won't have glycogen stored, but we'll have some glucose and carbohydrates, which is probably going to equate to around about 1 to 2% of the amount of meat that they're actually eating. Which is probably going to be about maybe 10 to 20 grams roughly for an adult human eating maybe 500 to 1 kilo, 500 grams to 1 kilo of meat a day, which you're not going to get on a carnivore diet, strict carnivore diet nowadays, because that muscle glycogen is actually gone. It's been depleted with handling, processing, and aging from the time it's basically killed. You have to go out and eat a fresh kill, probably within hours. I don't know exactly the science, so please don't quote me on that, but it's gone pretty damn quickly. So the meat that you're buying in the supermarket, the butcher, and so on, is basically has zero glucose, zero sugar left in it. Whereas the muscle meat, liver, etc., if you were eating it out on the wild, killing and eating in the wild, it would actually have glycogen in it, which is basically your sugar.
So that's not a stress state. That's not a famine state. That's not a, oh my goodness, we can only do this a short term state. Like lions don't need, oh, I better carb load. This being ketosis too long is just horrible. But herbivores as well, because while they eat fibrous plants, and the vast majority of herbivores are eating fibrous plants, they don't. Fiber is made out of glucose, but no animal can actually break down fiber into glucose. There's no have cellulase. They're on cellulose. The cellulase breaks down those bonds. No animal, not even termites, make cellulase. It's the microorganisms in their gut that make cellulase, and they eat the fiber. And then as a byproduct, they produce saturated fat and protein.
Yeah, this is quite true. This is quite true.
And so they eat the fiber, but what they absorb is fat and protein. So cows and horses and gorillas, they're all getting fat and protein, and they're all in a ketogenic state. And so that ignores all that.
But let's say if you've seen my other video where Judy Cho is talking about why glucose rises on the carnivore diet and making a bit of a fool of herself using things like animal studies, cats, and dolphin studies to demonstrate her theory as to why this is perfectly fine in humans, which I don't agree with. She's mentioning studies where in dolphins they flip between essentially metabolic states. They flip between kind of ketosis and basically carnivore and carbohydrates in terms of their diet and so on. So maybe it's not just humans that are metabolically flexible. And why would dolphins do that if it wasn't an advantage? Dolphins are not going to the store and ordering processed food and addicted to sugar and carbohydrates and McDonald's and KFC and whatever else. They're doing that because they're designed to do that. What if humans were designed to be metabolically flexible? What if we were designed to actually eat carbohydrates in the winter to fatten up? Yes. But what if actually that's a requirement, really, in some sense, not to fatten up, no, but to eat carbohydrates because we've been doing it for millions of years. That's the way our bodies have evolved, and that's what they want us to do.
And so when people say, well, your blood sugar is supposed to go up and then your insulin goes up and that drives that down. That's only because when we've been observing and studying biochemistry, that's what people were doing. We're eating carbohydrate filled meals.
No, that's a pretty basic for physiological fact that you eat blood glucose, your insulin will go up and then it will bring it back down again. It's a pretty basic physiological fact.
So that was normal for the time, but that's actually not normal for humanity and our species, and it can cause a lot of problems.
Again, where is the evidence? Where are the studies citing this? Where are the studies, showing that a natural human state is ketosis? Where are the studies showing that we are meant to be in a long-term nutritional ketosis all the time? Again, my argument would be, well, why not babies? What's different about them? Why do they not want to be in ketosis all the time? Because they're not in ketosis all the time. Maybe predominantly, but not all the time.
High blood sugar kills you. High blood sugar kills diabetics. That high blood sugar, those glucose molecules, little rings, they physically fuse to other molecules called glycation. And
Yes, but glycation doesn't kill you particularly.
you get it.
I suppose if it's that bad, yes, I suppose it could, but glycation is not really going to kill anybody particularly.
Advanced glycation end products, AGEs, and you build these things up, you're getting more and more damage in your body. And so
which is a big problem in things like bacon, which he says is, was saying was fine for you, but that's a big problem in bacon, AGEs.
body is desperately trying to protect you by raising your insulin. It's like when you have a fire at your house, the fire department comes.
Yeah, that's true. Glucose is very damaging to the body. So yes, insulin will go up to bring it down. This is a normal physiological response, but that doesn't mean that we don't want some level of carbohydrate. It's kind of, again, taking the example to the extreme.
And they're hosing it down with water, and you get all this water damage. Oh, I don't want to get this water damage. And I'm like, you want your house to burn down? Right. So
well, the more accurate analogy really would be saying it's like having a tiny little campfire outside for most people, and then you just put it out at the end of the night, and then it's fine. It's no big deal. The house fire is when you've got terrible insulin disorder, dysregulation, and insulin resistance and diabetes. Yes, that's when there's a problem. But having a little campfire every day is probably not going to lead to you just suddenly setting your whole house on fire every day. No, if you're just sensible with what you're doing. Again, another extreme example just to kind of make it sound more scary.
take the water damage because you don't want the fire damage. You don't want it all to be destroyed, right? But then you start a fire the next day and more water damage, and the next day, 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 and the next day. And pretty soon your house is screwed, right? Because you got a lot of water damage, you got a lot of fire damage.
Yeah, but if you have a campfire every day, your house is fine.
And you're trying to repair things and do these sorts of things, but the fires keep coming. That's what we're doing every day with high, jacking up your blood sugar. So you have about 4 grams of glucose in your entire bloodstream at any given time. That's a level teaspoon.
It's not a teaspoon, actually. 5 grams is a teaspoon. But you actually have about 4 to 6 grams. 4 is on the lower end, actually, would be considered not low, but lowish. You have about 4 to 6 grams typically on average. I forget the American units. I think it's 40 to 70 milligrams per deciliter, but please don't quote me on that. I don't use American units very often because I'm in Australia. Australia, it's about 3.5 to 5.5 millimoles per liter, which is a different unit of measurement. That equates to approximately maybe, like 3 to 5 grams probably of blood sugar.
Of glucose.
So maybe 4 grams is actually about right, to be honest. But American units actually slightly higher, maybe 4 to 6 grams roughly. So there might be a little bit of what's it with the equations there with millimoles per liter gets very complicated, but it's pretty similar.
Yep.
Right. And that is responsible to run all the physiological processes of your body and brain. Just
Well, no, because especially if you're in ketosis anyway, your ketone bodies are actually fueling a lot of it. And only the small percentage, about what, 25% of your brain is actually obligated to use glucose. Even in normal regulation, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, your body is still producing and using ketone bodies all the time, just not as a primary fuel source. It's going to be using, if you're kind of, not in ketosis, it's going to be using carbohydrates as a primary fuel source, but it's still going to be using other things like ketone bodies.
those 4 grams, 1 extra gram is a toxic dose.
Bullshit. No, it's not. No, it is not. I've already pointed out between about 4 to 6 grams in your bloodstream at any one time is entirely normal. 5 grams is not a toxic dose.
Of glucose in your body. 1 extra gram, you get up to 5 grams, you start overwhelming your system.
No, you don't. As I've said, it is not a toxic dose.
With glycation, and you actually can die. This is
No, no, you do not die if you have 5 grams of sugar in your body, in your bloodstream. You do not. A normal glucose level is between about 4 and 6 grams at any given point. Even that 5.5 millimole per liter in Australian units, which is kind of considered the normal range, a diabetic range would be considered a fasting of 7 millimoles per liter. 5.5 millimoles per liter is about 4.9, 4.95, 4.99 something grams. Basically, let's call it 5 grams. This is an entirely normal blood sugar. And he's saying that it's going to kill you. What bullshit is he saying?
where you're losing toes and feet and legs.
No, you are not. No, you are not losing toes and feet and legs with a blood sugar of 5 grams.
They get kidney failure.
No, you don't.
They go blind.
No, you don't.
They get heart disease.
No, you do not.
And they die.
No, you don't. None of that happens if you have a blood sugar of 5 grams, which is equivalent to about 5.5 millimoles per liter, which is considered entirely normal, even in the kind of functional space. It's equivalent to about, I think it's roughly about 70. I'd have to do the calculation, but basically normal glucose level in America as well. This is entirely bullshit. This is entirely false. This is entirely wrong. And he's making it sound terrible, that it's going to kill you and it's going to be a horrible, savage death if you have a blood glucose level of 5 grams. This is absolute bullshit.
Right? The diabetics do, right? And so that's...
Yeah, if you're diabetic, those things can happen. Not if you're not diabetic with a blood sugar of 5.
1 extra gram prolonged of glucose. And so, of course...
Yeah, prolonged for like, what, 1,000 years, maybe. Even then, it's still considered entirely normal. This is absolute bullshit.
You need your insulin to go up. That's damage control hazmat, but you're taking...
No, your insulin does not need to go up particularly high if your blood sugar is at 5. That is absolutely normal levels of blood glucose.
Water damage in at the same time because you're affecting 100 other different processes, and that really screws
You are not.
Screws up your body.
So the fireman...
No, it doesn't.
With the water, is the water the insulin?
Yeah.
Got it. Yes.
Yeah.
So when that old mate comes into your office and you see his numbers at 72 or whatever it is fasting, what plan do you put in place? Like for people that aren't aware, like, and we know you're a carnivore specialist, what are you giving him? What sort of plan? Are you going sitting down and going, mate, this is your diet? Like obviously you've got that back information on him, but you're like, this is what you need to start doing to get this stuff down. And what's he eating on day one? Once he leaves your office, what do you got him on? Yeah,
I mean, just you eat whatever meat that tastes good to you, makes you feel the best you can afford and have access to. And eggs are included in that. Eggs are honorary meat. They're all the nutrients and everything.
Eggs are amazing. I absolutely love eggs. Great food.
Then building blocks of building meat, because that turns into an animal. And then we look at their blood work And I mean, I can tell you, I can show you all the issues with your metabolism. I can show you all the problems. I can show you your fasting insulin. I can show you your fasting leptin, which is another hormone. People's testosterone is in the tank, or women are going through premature menopause and their thyroid dysfunction. A woman has PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome.
None of which is really anything to do with the carnivore diet at all, but yeah, fine.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there you go, guys. Yeah, I mean, look, for the most part, I agree with a lot of, what Chafee says. Sugar in high levels is dangerous, yes, but he is basically either knowingly or unknowingly absolutely bullshitting on this 5 grams of sugar is not dangerous for you. 4 grams of sugar is not a teaspoon anyway, but I'm being facetious there. 5 grams of sugar in your blood at any one time is not dangerous. It is not going to kill you. You are not going to get heart disease from that. Your legs and toes are not going to fall off. Your kidneys are not going to fail. Your heart is not going to fail. Your brain is not going to fail. And you are not going to die a horrible, savage death because you have 5 grams of blood sugar at any one time. This is an entirely normal level. He also is basically either not aware or chooses to not be aware of things like the Inuit population not being in ketosis predominantly, studies showing that this defect in the CPT1 gene, which I wish he would acknowledge. And that Paul Saladino pointed out to him a while ago. I'd love to see him actually cite his sources for a lot of these things as well, because it makes it extremely difficult to actually fact check when, and you can just say anything basically and get away with it when you're not citing sources, because nobody can say that really that you're wrong because you've not said where you've got any of the information from. So it's very, very difficult to actually fact check anything. Look, I like Chafee and I respect him, and he got me into the carnivore diet. So I hope I haven't been too hard on him in this episode. And I'm not being, I don't want to be rude to him, but, I think we have a responsibility to actually be honest with people, to be open with people, and to say when, when people are basically caught saying bullshit, when they're saying things which are factually incorrect, just for effect or whatever it is, scaring people into, watching their videos and all of these things, when it's just completely factually wrong. I think it's a real problem and it needs to be called out. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching this episode. I'll see you in the next one.